All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thanks again for joining us for today's webinar to any of those of you who have just hopped on. Today, we'll be speaking on how to ace your lab's competency assessments and avoid common citations. We'll be co-presenting with MediaLab today, and we're very grateful to have their knowledge and expertise on this call. My name is Alex Mitchell. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager for Lighthouse Lab Services, and I'll be serving as a host and running the Q&A during today's call. I just want to really quickly introduce our expert speakers who you could see on camera below. We're going to go on camera for introductions and then go ahead and turn them off during the presentation to help with buffering and the flow of the presentation. Just real quickly, I'd like to introduce Leah Westover. Leah is a Delaware native who started her career as a medical laboratory scientist, graduating from the University of Delaware with a BS degree in laboratory science. She obtained her master's in public health from Thomas Jefferson University soon after and worked as a lead tech in Jefferson Hospital for Neuroscience Laboratory in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She later moved on to work as the Director of Education and Outreach and MLS Program Director at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. Since then, Leah has been working at MediaLab for over 10 years now and is now directing their sales department. And just quickly, for those of you who don't know, MediaLab is a leading provider of quality management solutions for clinical laboratories and hospitals. Their integrated cloud-based solutions include document control, accreditation management, incident reporting and management, competency evaluation, and compliance and continuing education training and documentation. They work with more than 4,000 healthcare facilities worldwide. And then quickly, joining us from the Lighthouse side is Dr. Lori Millner. Dr. Millner is a laboratory director and technical consultant for our PhD team. She received her PhD in 2011 from the University of Louisville in pharmacology and toxicology, and she has now served as a lab director and consultant for numerous clinical laboratories for the last 8 years. She's performed numerous laboratory-developed test validations and has experience with many types of molecular and diagnostic testing. So just want to say thank you again to both Dr. Millner and Leah for joining us today and sharing their expertise. I want to touch on a few housekeeping items really quickly here. You can reduce your chance of buffering by closing any bandwidth-heavy apps or other tabs you may have running in the background. This webinar will be recorded, and it's going to be sent out to the email address you registered under sometime tomorrow when that recording's ready. And if you'd like slides, those are also available under the handouts section on the right sidebar. You can download those directly. And we also have a little bit of additional information about Lighthouse and about MediaLab's Compass platform. No need to wait till the end to ask us any questions. If you'd like to submit some for the Q&A at the end, you can go ahead and do so in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that throughout and curating a list for the end of the webinar. And we're also going to run some polls during the webinar to help with engagement and just get an overall sense of where our audience is at. If you want to participate in those, they're anonymous, so feel free to do so. And if you'd rather just skip the poll, you can exit out and continue on with the session. And then very briefly, just about us at Lighthouse Lab Services, we do offer a number of services for medical laboratories, and it's how we're able to keep these events free. But we are one of the nation's leading and most trusted end-to-end full-service medical laboratory consulting and recruiting firms. Whether you are looking to start up a lab or grow your current business, we offer labs a way to accelerate their success. And we also have a robust mock inspection program that I'd like to mention here briefly. Our service helps identify potential issues prior to federal inspections and serves as a due diligence inspection for those who may be seeking to purchase existing clinical labs. So if you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to open up the slide out I'm about to push here, and you could fill out that form at any point now or later and contact our team. And very quickly, I'm going to run down the agenda before I turn things over to Dr. Millner. Today, we'll be covering the 6 required CLIA elements that must be assessed annually. We'll be speaking about which individuals within your lab are qualified to perform competency assessments, detailing some of the most common citations and how to avoid them, And then we'll take a look at the end about how to standardize processes and utilize electronic systems to help reduce your administrative burden. And of course, as we mentioned at the end, we will have a Q&A with Leah and Dr. Millner. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Millner.
Thanks, Alex. So just as a way of introduction, I've been involved with many labs over the course of my career, and I've been involved in more than 10 lab inspections as a director myself. I've also been involved with more than 10 labs providing mock inspection help. I've also helped labs respond to their citations. And I can tell you that the number one citation I've seen both for myself as a lab director and when I'm inspecting other labs has been on competency assessments. And why do these citations really matter? So in addition to a competency, just make sure that your lab staff know how to run an assay or a test appropriately. So if they haven't been trained and they're not competent to run the results, of course, that can affect the quality of the results, which is very important. But also when you get, for those of you new to laboratory testing, when you have an inspection and then you have a citation and you may have a repeat citation, if you don't correct those deficiencies, then CMS can shut down your laboratory or suspend the lab director's license. So they can be very serious and cause, the lab to shut down. So what I've shown here is just an example of a revocation of a CLIA certificate. And you can see due to the reason of failure to correct deficiencies. So just for those that aren't familiar with this process yet, just letting you know that these citations can be very detrimental. On this slide, I'm showing one of the most common citations I've seen. So I looked at several reports I've had from inspections, both as myself as a lab director and helping others go through mock inspections. And I won't read all this to you, but this is a snip from one of those inspections that I've seen quite frequently. And basically the laboratory, in this case, they had a plan they had an SOP, a standard operating procedure, and a plan to document competency to demonstrate that lab staff were competent to run the assays, but they weren't following that plan. And so there are many layers to this, as Leah is going to get into in more detail, but it's important to both have the plan and then have the tools to execute that plan properly. And in this case, the lab didn't execute, and so they got a citation from their inspecting body. And this type of citation has also been reported as the most common citation by CLIA themselves. So if you're interested, you can go onto the CLIA website to see this data. But basically, this is demonstrating that competency assessments are the number one deficiency. This was taken from 2021, which is the most recently available on the website. So close to 19% of all labs had this deficiency. So it's a very common deficiency, but it is so critical to get this right so that you can ensure that you're having quality results reported from your laboratory. So what do you need to do? So just briefly, there are 6 elements that Leah is going to cover. So you want to make sure initially that you just have a template that has all of those 6 elements that are covered. Then you need to either have a calendar that has all the dates that are required for initial competency, as well as 6-month and yearly competency when those are required. And really someone needs to be dedicated to this task. Someone that knows what they're doing and someone that has some experience with this should be really dedicated to this task. I've seen it too often get lost when there's not a dedicated person who's responsible. And if you don't have that kind of bandwidth or you don't have that kind of expertise in your lab, then a really great solution is to use an automated software that can help keep track of dates and when things are due and what elements are required to be covered. So with that, I think that Leah is going to take over now.
Thanks so much, Dr. Millner. That was really a nice summary coming from a lab director perspective, and I love that. I just wanted to start by saying Happy Lab Week to all of you on the call. I know it's an exciting week, and hopefully everybody's digging into their fun potlucks and lab games. But thanks to all of you who are dedicated to helping with patient care in the lab. So my name is Leah Westover, and I am here today from MediaLab to help with some best practices and avoiding some common competency assessment pitfalls. And I hope that you'll find those beneficial. As always, I just wanted to say that your accrediting body and their checklists and standards are the ultimate authority on your particular requirements and interpretations. So keep that in mind as I'm going through this today. I am not the authority. Certainly your accrediting body is. So just bear that in mind. But I hope that some of these tips and tricks would be helpful for the folks on the call. Okay, so that said, why is competency cited so often? I'm sure it's no big secret, and Dr. Millner just mentioned this too, that this particular standard is a little bit tricky for labs. We know already that inspectors are going to come in and look for information in employee files, particularly their credentials, their experience, and the CV, which is important for competency assessors. They're going to be looking at our competency records. They're going to be looking for the delegation of duties documentation. So we know all of that. So why do we tend to struggle with this requirement? So hopefully this will be a good kind of synopsis of some of the most common issues. I think the number one is probably confusion about the requirement itself and its interpretation. I know, at least for me personally, I've experienced both as a lab team member and working at MediaLab that there are still confusion and different kind of interpretations that vary from lab to lab and inspection group to inspection group when it comes to CLIA and competency requirements. So no big shock there. I think that hopefully this presentation will clear up some of that, but that is still an issue. Competency assessor qualification mistakes being one of those that I'm going to get into a little bit with you today. I see sometimes that the CLIA elements are not all included or documented as part of the assessment, and Dr. Millner had mentioned those 6 CLIA procedures. We'll talk about those too. Competencies being too consolidated and not kind of outlined by test system. And then finally, we have incorrect timing and intervals for those assessments. So that's kind of where I'm going to lead with my part of the presentation today. Okay, so confusion obviously with interpretation between labs and inspection teams. It could be things as easy as, I think that competencies are scheduled by hire date, where it's really by the initiation of testing date. It seems like there's still some kind of confusion swirling about some of the details of these regs. And I just wanted to say, don't forgo contacting your accrediting body. If you're looking at your program, you're confused, you need some guidance there. I've had great luck in the past. It's not embarrassing to call and ask. It's definitely not shameful. You want to make sure that you're on the right track. When you're reading that reg and you're interpreting it correctly, just simply ask, make that phone call. I actually got on the phone with a rep from CAP's LAP program just yesterday asking questions. So please feel free to do that and don't be embarrassed to. A quick little note, competency is not the same as performance evaluations or PT, and sometimes those things get confused. So this is just a very clear point that our annual performance evaluations are not the same as competency, and our PT program is also part of a competency assessment with CLIA 5, but not the entirety of it. I did want to mention too, there's some online resources at the end of the slide deck, but also just if you're looking online, you'll find quite a number of them from CMS, from various lab publications. You'll find recorded webinars. And again, I know CAP just held one recently on competency, so I put a little link there for you. But feel free to check those out if you're feeling a little bit confused. Okay, so let's get into talk a little bit about qualifications for competency assessment. Okay, So who is actually qualified to assess competency? There has been a little bit of confusion swirling around this one. With moderate complexity testing, the team member has to be qualified as a technical consultant, which means at a very minimum, a bachelor's degree and 2 years of lab training and experience. Where conversely with high complexity testing, when we're assessing team members performing high complexity testing, that they have to qualify as a technical supervisor, but the technical supervisor can actually delegate that to a general supervisor that might have at a minimum, a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree with 2 years of experience in high complexity testing. And one way, a tip that was shared with me to remember that, and might seem counterintuitive, but moderate complexity testing sometimes leaves the lab setting, whether it be maybe ER or surgery, where there's sometimes non-lab testing personnel or non-lab personnel who are performing those tests. And it's good to have a competency assessor who does have a higher level of education and experience when they're going to be doing those competency assessments. So hopefully that helps to make sense out of that for some that might be still confused about the moderate versus high complexity testing and the assessors required. And that said, you do need to make sure that the documentation needed for those team member qualifications based on this CLIA subpart M are on hand, whether that's in the personnel file or wherever you're storing that information. It should be readily available and have been evaluated prior to your inspections, just to make sure that everybody is actually qualified and are sitting in the right role. Okay, so we're going to continue on that thought and just say that I'm kind of talking generally about this requirement, but there are special requirements and very specific requirements for other areas too, which are also in play. And examples are transfusion medicine or pathology or point of care. So I'm not really getting into those specifically today, but keep in mind that those departments do have additional requirements when it comes to competency assessment and assessors. And then here's a good one with, I have it in bold for us, reminder not to forget to assess your assessors. So we talk a lot about testing personnel and their assessments, but when it comes to your assessors, they also need competencies. Okay, so they need competencies showing that they're fulfilling the personnel responsibilities that are outlined in that CLIA subpart M of the CLIA reg. If they perform patient testing, they also need, you know, kind of the regular competencies and the way we think of them with the 6 CLIA elements, 8 if you're in New York, as well. And so I just wanted to mention software systems. I'll be talking a little bit about MediaLab today, can help provide structure and some automated scheduling for some of these kind of supervisory type competency assessments too, for clinical consultants, technical consultants, et cetera. All right. When it comes to those assessor qualifications and competencies for them, I did just take a little snip out of the CMS brochure. And these are the kinds of questions and the kinds of documentation that we wanted to have available to show that we're actually assessing our assessors. So I'm not going to read them all to you, but it's really kind of going through the role and the responsibilities of that particular technical consultant or supervisor. You know, are they evaluating the competency of their personnel? Are they ensuring that the lab is enrolled in the appropriate PT programs? Are they ensuring that the QC program is in effect and adequate? So those are some of the potential maybe checklist items that you might have included in some of those assessor competencies. Okay, now let's talk about the CLIA competency assessment procedures. I'm sure everybody is super familiar with these. We hear it again and again and again. But I do have a slide just to show one more time. We have our 6 elements here. We call them the CLIA competency assessment procedures. They have to be included in each phase of assessment. Okay, it needs to include the pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical phases of testing. And they apply to team members for each CLIA lab they work in, even in the same system. And I think I have this note in here twice, because we do see that happen sometimes where there's not kind of a lot of knowledge surrounding that, or someone gets confused. Even if an employee A works at a hospital in the same set of equipment and they work part-time at location B with the same equipment there, they still need an assessment, the competency assessments for each CLIA lab. Okay, even if it's the same employee and same equipment. So just keep that in mind for any of us on the call who are in lab networks. Okay, and even though we have our 6 elements listed here, there's some states that require additional, and New York is an example. They also have CLIA 7 and 8. Okay, so I'm going to kind of outline some ideas on how to tackle these CLIA elements. If you're in a paper-based system, that's fine too. A lot of the screenshots I'm showing are from MediaLab, so we have an online system for competency assessment. But hopefully this will give you just some ideas on ways that you can help to format and make sure that you're getting all this documented. So here I'm talking about CLIA elements 1 through 4. Most people have them in some kind of a checklist format. I'm showing you my electronic checklist format here, just as a little snippet of that, where we're going to have explicit tasks and subtasks. What are we observing? What are we ensuring that our employees are competent doing? We have comments areas where we're usually entering things like accession numbers or tracer information, corrective actions and remediations, which is a big one. So hopefully your checklists have something similar. What we really don't love to see as much is just the 6 CLIA elements listed in a checklist. That's not really quite enough. You need to be a little bit more granular with that as far as your tasks and subtasks go. And I just have an example here on the screen for you. Along with the checklist, it's also really nice to have either a software system or some kind of storage system if you're doing this on paper, where along with marking the review, let's say of intermediate test results, QCPT, you're also attaching that documentation or saving the documentation too. So that way the inspectors will have copies of that. I think that the point is, it's not just enough really to have check, date and time of the observer. We really need to have the backup documentation for that and the tracer availability for the inspectors. Okay, and then finally, making sure that the checklists are signed, the name, date, time. We don't want to see just like initials. We really want to have more information about the date and time of those assessments and the assessor's name. Okay, so here I'm going to talk a little bit about CLIA 5, which is the PT documentation. We need to make sure that each team member has documented evidence of either a PT kit or some kind of repeat sample, a blind duplicate activity for each phase of assessment. So you might have, I don't know, maybe an Excel sheet if you're not using an automated system that's tracking when those have to be completed, or maybe some kind of calendar reminder. But you really want to plan those out to make sure that each tech gets one of those in the right phase of assessment. And you want to obviously save those PT records so you have them for inspection time. The snip that I'm showing you here is from MediaLab. So we have kind of a 2-section setup. Either section 1, let's say if an employee, a team member did a kit from CAP or API, we would fill out section 1 for them. If instead they did a repeat sample or a blind duplicate, we would use section 2 to complete that information. Obviously, these go out with reminders, so everyone knows when these are due in our system. And we do have an attachment area to actually include, let's say, the CAP survey results when they come back, or worksheets or printouts that were used during that PT. You can have that stored in the system. Just makes life a little easier. Okay, let's talk about CLIA 6 for problem-solving skills. In my experience, I see that labs use quizzes or quiz banks most commonly for this element. I'm showing you a little screenshot in MediaLab of a competency quiz that's online. Obviously, that's a nice way to handle it since those are auto-assigned to our team members in the right windows and they're auto-graded. And we can even have corrective actions that kick in if there's failures that occur to make sure that our team members get remediated. But you can also document CLIA 6 with troubleshooting activities that are already happening in the lab. If you have, let's say, an instrument problem log, you might want to scan a copy of that if your employee had um, some troubleshooting activities that day, and that's a perfect opportunity to help with the documentation for CLIA 6. Okay, and again, either a quiz or some kind of problem-solving activity needs to be included in each phase of assessment. All right. So I just wanted to put a little slide in here about CAP's Gen 55500. They really suggest trying to incorporate your competency assessment activities in your routine practices and procedures. I think the idea being that we're in the mindset of capturing competency detail and documentation as it's happening, rather than just hitting a point where someone is due and trying to capture all of that information in a single point in time. So some of their strategies they list are, the assessment of recording quality control results and instrument maintenance data. For element number 3, just kind of capturing that during the monthly supervisory review processes that you're already doing for those records. Or for CLIA element number 5, when you're reviewing PT or some kind of alternative performance assessment record that you have that your lab is using, that you can help to document CLIA 5 for that tech or that team member performing that PT. And then for CLIA element number 6, when you're reviewing those corrective action logs with problems or instrument functions were investigated, that's a great opportunity for you to document some of that for the team members involved for CLIA element 6 and their competency. So again, just trying to get into the mindset that competency is an ongoing process. It is not, I have to stop what I'm doing because Sally Smith is due today. It's, I'm doing these activities and thinking about competency throughout the year. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about competency consolidation problems. And this is one that I see pretty frequently at MediaLab. Here in the CMS brochure, they talk about competencies needing to be structured based on the unique procedures for the test. Okay, so as long as there's no unique aspects, problems, procedures associated with any test or platform, all of the analytes or tests performed on that platform can be combined. So we think of that as like a test system, like a particular analyzer instrument. However, if they do have some unique aspects, problems, procedures, etc., that are separate and different, they would need to have a separate competency to ensure the staff are competent on those particular aspects as well. So with that guidance in mind, I'm kind of summarizing that. Think about your competencies by testing platform, if you can, combining those separate analytes as long as they don't have any unique aspects. What we don't like to see is a competency assessment called chemistry or micro. If you're not really clearly differentiating each test system within that assessment. And so I have a little slide to show you what I mean, if that makes sense to everybody. So here I'm showing you in MediaLab, we're looking at my coagulation competency folder. And I've opened that folder to show you I have individual competencies for my FDP, my HEPZIME, my mixing studies, my PFT. So we're setting up competencies by system rather than by whole department. That's just really difficult to manage in some cases. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas there too. Competency assessment timing, let's talk a little bit about the timing. So obviously this is outlined in our 42 CFR 493, 1451, and then there's a separate 1411 as well, where we talk about when these assessments are due. So our new team members, we know that they need semi-annual assessments during the first year that they test patient specimens. Again, the clock starts when the employee is trained and ready for patient testing. It's not based on hire date. Okay, as far as CAP, their new guidance is the first assessment needs to happen within 7 months after the initiation of testing. And then the second assessment, which we usually think about as the annual, no later than 12 months from the start of testing during that first year, and that's in CAT Gen 55505. Thereafter, our seasoned employees are going to be on an annual schedule unless their test methods or instrumentation change, in which case they need to have some training on that prior to starting patient testing. Okay, and then we'll need to make sure that those new aspects get included into their annual evaluations thereafter. So software solutions can really, really help with the timing. We get lots of reminders when an employee's in their window. Those go out to the end user and the admins. It just makes everyone's life easier when there's auto scheduling happening with reminders to make sure that this happens. And here I have a little example, a little screenshot to show you too. And this is in MediaLab. We can put in dates and kind of show, okay, our training and initial, if we do that on this day, when would that, and I completed it, when would my semi-annual be assigned and due? Then when would my first annual be assigned and due? These are programmed into electronic systems, usually with some flexibility for you to change certain pieces of the date scheduling according to your preferences or your policies or procedures. But we do see a lot of citations when the competencies are not completed within the correct timeframes or windows. Sometimes you can't help it if staff are out on vacation or FMLA or things get in the way. But if it's because, there's forgetfulness, there are easier ways to make sure that those schedules stay intact and that there's reminders that go out to admins and employees. Okay, and just another reminder here again, all of these competency rules apply to the team members at each CLIA lab they work in, even if it's the same lab system. All right, so
One second, Leah, really quickly
sure.
here. But before we hop into talking about some software solutions and specifically, Media Lab solutions, I just wanted to push this offer on the screen real quick in case you were interested in following up with Leah and her team about some of these automated solutions available through Media Lab. Please open that form. Feel free to fill it out, and someone from Media Lab will follow up with you soon.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Yeah, make sure you fill out that little box, guys, if you wanted to hear from MediaLab or learn more about our software solutions. What the screenshots we're seeing here in my presentation are from our Compass system. All right, so software solutions. Obviously, there's a number of benefits. I think one of the biggest is going paperless. It's a beautiful thing. No more folders and binders and file cabinets overflowing with all of this documentation. It's all paperless. We can have custom competency assessment builds, and there's usually a lot of templates, at least in our system, and I'm sure in other vendor systems too, that gives you kind of a jumping off point that's not square one, where you have a checklist template, you have, a quiz template, you have a PT template. Options for you to kind of customize based on your lab's test systems and policies and procedures to make that transition a little easier from paper-based to electronic. Standardization is huge, especially for a lot of the big multi-lab networks that we work with, where they really want to have standardized assessments for the test systems they have in common at each lab where those test systems are used. So we're talking standardized checklists, standardized quizzes, standardized PT assignments, etc. And in software systems, it's really easy to do that. We get auto assignments with email notifications for both end users and admins. At least in MediaLab, and I'm sure in most vendor systems they do this too, that really helps to alert that, okay, well, Sally Smith is due on the SysMech 6-month assessment 30 days from now. So you get a little heads up about that. Everybody is aware that that's due, and then things don't get missed. Electronic signatures are easy to capture in electronic systems with date timestamps. Easy on-demand reporting. That's huge too. During inspection time, you want to be able to pull up a really nice polished report of your assessments, either by user or team member or by department or by instrument or for everybody. And it's really nice in electronic systems that you can query reports in all of those ways on demand whenever you need to. Most of our software systems have the end user and admin views too. So an end user sees, in this case, just the competencies that he or she is responsible for, where admins will see their entire work group or the entire lab and all of the team members. And there's multiple solutions out there. So again, I've been talking about MediaLab's Compass, and we have some screenshots from that. CAP also has a program called the Competency Assessment Hub. So those are two examples right off the bat. I'm sure there are more, but electronic solutions are really getting more and more popular now for competencies.
Yeah, and can I jump in here for 1 second? Just from a lab director perspective, all of these requirements can be a little overwhelming. And so it really is amazing to have a software remind you when these things are due, because they're going to be due for everyone at different times. So I just know when I've, been in the lab and trying to set up programs, especially for larger labs, it's difficult to remember all of these dates and times without someone really being dedicated to it. So if that's the case, then a solution like this can be just a huge lifesaver.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate hearing that from your perspective too.
Yeah.
All right. So first we'll talk a little bit about standardization of assessments. So if anybody is on the call and is part of a bigger lab network where you have multiple hospitals or multiple lab locations, sometimes it's nice to be able to kind of import assessments either from your network or from MediaLab, et cetera, to create electronic assessments that are kind of easy to roll out, that are standardized, and that the individual labs can't necessarily change an assessment that a corporate group have made for them. But there are lots of templates available. This is just showing a little screenshot in MediaLab with some of our templates right on top here that can be imported. And then those are available for you to edit based on your policies and procedures. So that's a nice jumping off point. So we'll talk about the end user perspective too in these kinds of programs. So it involves the team members in that they get email notifications, they have online to-do lists, and it kind of makes them aware of when their assessments are due. They're able to take their quizzes online, they're able to add documentation, attachments, etc. They can see the checklist that they'll be observed on, or what kind of PT assignments they have. Obviously, those, at least in our system, will have to be documented by an assessor, but the employee is fully aware of the activities that they need to have completed for that phase of assessment. In this case, you're looking at like a little ortho-vitros assessment. On the admin side, the platforms help with the scheduling of assessments for the right team member on the right phase at the right time. And then we have the automated emails that go out and task reminders as well. You also have really nice reports. I'll show some of those throughout the next few slides, but here's one that's showing me all of my incomplete activities that I have that are due in the next 30 days. So you can see I have some for the Siemens EXL. I have a blood culture eval. I have some Bacti alerts. I have an ortho-vitros. But it'll have the employees here. They're kind of blurred out in my screen just to protect them. But it's really nice to be able to query this in real time whenever you're needing to do so for your competency monitoring. And here's the next screen, which is me opening up one of those particular report lines where we click details and we can see the observation checklist that 1 out of the 9 checklist items was complete, but the PT hasn't been started yet, the exam hasn't been started yet. Where the little red arrows are, it's kind of showing us which CLIA elements are associated with that particular activity. So you get really nice granular reports so you can kind of expand and look at more detail. And when those are actually completed, it's nice to be able to show that to the inspection team when they're asking as well. And then here we're showing a little bit of the dashboard, the homepage in Compass. This is particularly helpful for our admin team where they can look at metrics and stats showing competency assessments that are up to date or in review, incomplete or overdue. Obviously, there's some hot links there. We can click to open those reports. But it's nice sometimes when as soon as you log in, you kind of get a quick snapshot of where you are as far as the competency program. Okay, I think ultimately what we really want to do at the end of the day, why we're working so hard on this, is that we want to present a really polished and detailed report of all of those completed assessments. We want the system to update our competency activities in real time as we're getting things completed in the lab. And we want that available 24/7. We wanted to be able to show that to inspectors on demand without being nervous that we're missing any pieces of that documentation. And certainly it's really nice not to keep this paper documentation in file cabinets and folders and binders anymore. And here we'll talk a little bit more about standardization of assessments. For the lab networks that do want to have work groups, let's say create some standardized assessments, let's say for hematology. They're going to work on their CVC and diff analyzer or their coag instrumentation, et cetera. And any of the labs who use that particular analyzer, instrument, or test system can be provided with that assessment that's been developed at corporate. It's kind of locked down for the lab so that it will sync with any changes or updates over time that corporate lab group decides to make. Maybe they update a quiz question that was confusing, or if they added a new checklist task item, that would automatically update in any labs that were using that assessment. So those are just some really cool kind of higher level tips and tricks for our multi-lab networks in a system like Compass. And you're seeing in the little screen share here that if you are part of a multi-lab network, I can pull competency assessments from my lab from corporate, which in my case is MediaLab Laboratory Services. I can pull in assessments from other divisions like my sister hospitals or my sister labs that have developed competencies that I want to use, or pulling in assessments from MediaLab or for other MediaLab customers who have chosen to share those assessments. So in summary, the competency regs obviously can be a little confusing at first glance, but truly they don't have to be. Feel free to ask questions. Don't hesitate to contact your accrediting body. Most likely they've heard your particular question 10 times already and are happy to share the appropriate answers to alleviate any confusion. Try to avoid some of the common pitfalls that we mentioned here so you'll feel a little bit more confident in your competency assessment processes. And then finally, consider using some software solutions if you're still paper-based and it's difficult. It really does help to streamline and automate the competency program. And with MediaLab, other parts of your QMS as well. So thank you so much, Alex. I think that's all I've got, but happy to help with questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leah. I appreciate it. And it was a very thorough presentation there. We appreciate you offering that expertise. I'm just going to go ahead one more time now that we've seen a pretty good overview of the Compass platform. If you'd like to get in touch with Leah and her team, please go ahead and open that page there, and you can go ahead and fill out a form and someone will contact you. And we're going to go ahead and hop into Q&A here. Oh, also, these are the references Leah mentioned at the beginning of her presentation. If you wanted to follow up on anything she mentioned here, again, though these slides are available now under the handout section. Apologies on earlier. They weren't quite loaded there when I indicated they were. You can download them now, or you will receive a recording tomorrow, and it will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Okay, to hop into questions here really quick, I just want to say, as Leah and Dr. Millner stated at the front, your accrediting body is the ultimate authority on these answers. So they're going to speak from their experience and best practices, but please, anything we answer here today, obviously refer to your accrediting body for final say. For our first question, do current employees, when a lab develops a new methodology and have initial training, do those employees need a 6-month competency or just the initial and then the annual? And
So,
again,
did that question include new employees? Because I think that's the difference, whether it's a new employee or a
it's
seasoned.
for current employees. So just when they develop the new methodology, if they need a 6 month after that initial training, or just the initial and annual. And of course, like I said, if it's anything that we can't answer here, don't feel pressured.
Yeah, I feel like it would I would wanna take that one offline just because it would to me, it would depend more on what kind of testing we're talking about, and where the employees lie in their current when we consider them current. So I might prefer to take that question personally offline and help with that.
Absolutely. And again, if you didn't get a chance to fill out the form, please direct any questions that we have to that info email address listed right there at the bottom of the page, and we will get those over to Leah and her team. Next question: who performs the testing competency for the technical supervisor if there is not another qualified technical supervisor?
Dr. Millner, you can jump in with this one too, but I just wanted to answer. I actually had a similar question come up not too long ago with CAP. And what they suggested was, although some of our section directors and even the lab director are very busy, that sometimes you really have to rely on some of your leadership team members, if they are familiar and competent in that platform, to help you with that assessing if you don't have another technical supervisor on hand. That sometimes it falls onto leadership to do that if they're qualified.
All right. Well, thank you, Leah. Next question here: does the technical consultant have to administer and observe all 6 elements, or can another trained personnel observe and then the TC sign off on that assessment?
Can you repeat that one more time, Alex? I'm sorry.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Does the technical consultant have to administer and observe all 6 elements, or can another trained personnel observe and then the TC sign off on that assessment?
Okay, I guess it depends on if you're talking about moderate or high complexity testing, so there's a caveat there, but all 6 elements need to be documented. And it's okay to have multiple people collaborate on getting that done as long as you do have, names, dates, times, you have signatures of the folks that we're assessing. There's nothing wrong with having more than one person help with completing an assessment and splitting some of those CLIA elements among you.
All right, great. And then right here, we have a question specifically about the compass model. It should be right up your alley here. But if a lab is using the compass module and inspection proof, does the inspector have access to the compass module to see the assessments? This person has the module but hasn't quite figured that out yet.
Oh, okay. So those two systems have separate access points for inspectors. So if you have granted an inspection team access to inspection proof, that does not automatically provide them access to Compass. It's more common that inspectors will only have access to inspection proof, but when you're asked about competency records, the admins of the laboratory would pull the particular records in question up in Compass, either on screen for viewing or printing or sending to a CSV, depending on what the inspector prefers. But it's usually not as common to have the actual inspection team logging into Compass and viewing that themselves.
Great, thanks for that info. And then one final question here. This might be one better for Dr. Millner, but if a lab develops new tests, how do we perform competency? Do we need to include semi-annual competency for technologists?
Yes, laboratory developed tests will follow the same structure as other FDA cleared tests. So you would need a 6 month and a year, in general.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, there's a few other questions that'll be left out there. If we didn't get a chance to address those, please direct those to the info mailbox or the form that I pushed out earlier for MediaLab. But I just want to quickly say thank you again to both Leah and Dr. Millner for joining us today and sharing their expertise. I think this was a great subject to touch upon for Lab Week. And just also want to echo Leah's comments early on and say happy Lab Week again to everyone. And thank you for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the celebrations this week.